The Genesis creation story has two different parts. In the first part, Elohim, the Hebrew word for God, creates the heavens, the earth, and humankind in 6 days, then rests on the seventh. In the second part, God is called Yahweh Elohim, or the Lord God in English. He creates the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, and puts them in the Garden of Eden. In chapter 3, God tells Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They agree, but a sneaky talking serpent tricks Eve into eating the fruit. She convinces Adam to eat it too. God finds out and kicks them out of the garden, cursing them both. Adam is cursed to work hard for his food, and Eve is cursed to have painful childbirth. This is known by Christians as the fall of man into sin. Eve has 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Cain works the land, and Abel takes care of animals. They both make offerings to God, but God only accepts Abel's. Cain gets jealous and kills Abel. God then curses Cain. Eve has another son, Seth, to replace Abel, in line with God's promise. Generations pass, and the world becomes corrupted by human sin and Nephilim. God decides to wipe out humanity, but sees that Noah is the only good person left. He tells Noah to build an ark and take his family and pairs of every animal on it. 7 pairs of every clean animal and 1 pair of every unclean animal. Then, God sends a great flood to destroy the world. When the waters go down, God promises never to destroy the world with water again, using a rainbow as a sign of this promise. Later, humans try to build a great tower, the Tower of Babel. God sees them working together and decides to confuse them by giving them different languages, scattering them across the earth. Finally, the story traces a line from Shem to Abram. Abram, a descendant of Noah, gets a message from God telling him to leave his home in Mesopotamia and head to Canaan. God promises Abram that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars, but warns that they'll face oppression in a foreign land for 400 years before inheriting the land from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates. God changes Abram's name to Abraham and his wife Sarai's name to Sarah, which means princess, and says that all males should be circumcised as a sign of this promise. Since Sarah is old, she tells Abraham to have a child with her Egyptian maid, Hagar. Through Hagar, Abraham has a son named Ishmael. God plans to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for their sins. Abraham tries to convince God not to, but God says there aren't even 10 righteous people there. Angels save Abraham's nephew, Lot, and his family. But Lot's wife looks back at the destruction and turns into a pillar of salt. Lot's daughters, thinking they'll never find husbands, get Lot drunk and have children by him, becoming ancestors of the Moabites and Ammonites. Abraham and Sarah go to Gerar, pretending to be siblings, their half-siblings. The king of Gerar takes Sarah for his wife, but God warns him to return her, so he does. God sends Sarah a son named Isaac, through whom the covenant will be established. Sarah drives out Ishmael and Hagar into the wilderness, but God saves them and promises that Ishmael will also become a great nation. God tests Abraham by telling him to sacrifice Isaac. Just as Abraham is about to do it, an angel stops him and reaffirms the promise of countless descendants. After Sarah's death, Abraham buys a tomb at Machpelah, modern Hebron, and sends a servant to find a wife for Isaac among his relatives. The servant finds Rebekah, who becomes Isaac's wife. Abraham also has children with another wife, Keturah, whose descendants include the Midianites. Abraham dies old and prosperous, and his family buries him in Hebron. Isaac and Rebekah have twins, Esau and Jacob. Esau, the older one, sells his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of stew. Rebekah helps Jacob get Isaac's blessing as the firstborn. At 77, Jacob leaves home, meets Rachel at a well, and works 14 years to marry her and her sister Leah. Jacob's name is changed to Israel after wrestling with an angel. He has 12 sons and a daughter, Dinah, through his wives and their maidservants. Shechem, a Hivite, rapes Dinah and wants to marry her. Jacob agrees on the condition that all Hivite men are circumcised. While they're recovering, Jacob's sons Simeon and Levi kill them all. Jacob worries about retribution from the Canaanites and Perizzites, but takes all the Hivite women, children, and property. Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, is sold into slavery in Egypt by his jealous brothers. After many trials, including being jailed, Joseph stays faithful to God and interprets Pharaoh's dream about a famine. Pharaoh makes him second in command. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt for food during the famine, not recognizing him. After testing them, Joseph reveals himself, forgives them, and brings his family to Egypt. Jacob prophesies their futures before he dies. Joseph, before his death, tells his brothers to take his bones with them when God leads them out of Egypt. The book of Exodus picks up after Genesis, where Jacob's sons and their families join Joseph in Egypt. Fast forward 400 years, and there's a new Pharaoh who doesn't remember Joseph. He's scared that the now numerous Israelites might turn against Egypt. So, he makes their labor even harder and orders all newborn boys to be killed. But a Levite woman named Jochebed saves her baby by setting him afloat on the Nile in a little basket. Pharaoh's daughter finds the baby, names him Moses, and raises him as her own. Years later, a grown Moses goes out to see his people and witnesses an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Angry, Moses kills the Egyptian and flees to Midian to escape punishment. There, he marries Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest. While tending Jethro's flock, Moses encounters God in a burning bush. Moses asks God for his name, and God replies with, "I am that I am," which explains the name Yahweh. God tells Moses to go back to Egypt, free the Hebrews, and lead them to Canaan, the land promised to Abraham's descendants. On the way back, God tries to kill Moses, but Zipporah circumcises their son, and the attack stops. Moses reunites with his brother Aaron, and they return to Egypt to rally the Israelite elders and prepare them to leave Egypt to worship God. Pharaoh refuses to let them go. So God sends 10 plagues on Egypt, like turning the river to blood, a frog invasion, and total darkness. God commands the Israelites to start their calendar with the month of Aviv and to celebrate Passover by sacrificing a lamb and marking their doorposts with its blood. The final plague kills all the Egyptian firstborns, prompting Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. But he quickly regrets it and sends his army after them. At the Red Sea, God parts the waters for the Israelites and drowns Pharaoh's army. Life in the desert is tough, and the Israelites start longing for Egypt. God provides manna and water. They arrive at Mount Sinai, where Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, suggests appointing judges to help Moses. God asks the Israelites if they will be his people, and they agree. At the foot of the mountain, with thunder, lightning, fire, and smoke, God appears and speaks the 10 Commandments to the people. Moses then goes up the mountain to receive more laws and promises from God, who promises Canaan to the Israelites if they obey. God gives Moses instructions for building the tabernacle, where he will dwell among his people, and details about priestly garments, the altar, and sacrifices. Aaron becomes the first high priest. God gives Moses 2 stone tablets with the 10 Commandments, written by God's own finger. While Moses is with God, Aaron makes a golden calf for the people to worship. God tells Moses about this and threatens to destroy them, but Moses pleads for mercy. Moses comes down, smashes the tablets in anger, and orders the Levites to kill the unfaithful Israelites. God then commands Moses to carve 2 new tablets. Moses goes back up the mountain, and God gives him the 10 Commandments again. Moses comes down with a glowing face, and from then on, he has to cover it with a veil. He repeats God's commands to the Israelites: keep the Sabbath and build the tabernacle. They follow God's instructions, and God dwells in the tabernacle, guiding the Israelites on their travels. Chapters 1 to 5 of Leviticus talk about the different sacrifices from the point of view of the people offering them, but the priests are crucial for handling the blood. Chapters 6 to 7 cover the same stuff, but from the priest's perspective, since they're the ones doing the sacrificing and dividing up the portions. Some sacrifices are split between God, the priest, and the person offering, while others are completely burned to ashes as a single offering to God. Chapters 8 to 10 describe how Moses makes Aaron and his sons the first priests, the initial sacrifices, and then God destroying 2 of Aaron's sons for messing up the rituals. This highlights that altar priesthood is an Aaronite privilege and shows the responsibilities and dangers of their role. Once sacrifices and priesthood are set up, chapters 11 to 15 teach the people about purity. Eating certain animals makes you unclean, as does giving birth. Some skin diseases, mildew on walls and clothes, and bodily discharges, like menstruation and gonorrhea, are also unclean. The food rules are unclear, but the general idea is that these conditions involve losing life force, usually blood. Chapter 16 is about the Day of Atonement. It's the only day the high priest enters the holiest part of the sanctuary. He sacrifices a bull for the priest's sins and a goat for the people's sins. A second goat, bearing all the sins of the people, is sent into the desert to Azazel. Azazel's identity is mysterious, with some linking him to a fallen angel and older Bibles calling it a scapegoat. Chapters 17 to 26 make up the Holiness Code. It starts by banning all ritual slaughter outside the tabernacle and lists forbidden sexual contacts and child sacrifice. The holiness rules include penalties for worshiping Molech, consulting mediums, cursing parents, and unlawful sex. Priests get instructions on mourning and bodily defects. Blasphemy is punishable by death. There are rules for eating sacrifices, the calendar, sabbatical and jubilee years, oil lamps, bread in the sanctuary, and slavery. The code ends by telling the Israelites to choose between following the law for prosperity or facing horrible punishments, including being expelled from the land. Chapter 27 is a later edition about dedicating persons and things to the Lord and how to redeem vows instead of fulfilling them. God tells Moses, out in the wilderness of Sinai, to count all the men aged 20 and up who can fight and appoint leaders over each tribe. They find 603,550 Israelites ready for military service. The tribe of Levi is exempt from this count because they're set aside for service in the tabernacle instead of military duties. Moses sets apart the Levites for this holy service in place of the firstborn sons, who used to handle these duties. The Levites are divided into three families: the Gershonites, Kohathites, and Merarites, each led by a chief. Eleazar, Aaron's son, heads the Kohathites, while Aaron's other son, Ithamar, heads the Gershonites and Merarites. Then, preparations begin to head towards the Promised Land with various new laws and ordinances laid down. As the Israelites leave Sinai, they start complaining against God and are punished by fire. Moses, frustrated with their stubbornness, gets help from 70 elders chosen by God to assist him. Miriam and Aaron speak against Moses at Hazeroth, angering God. Miriam is struck with leprosy and is shut out of the camp for 7 days. After she is healed, the Israelites move on to the desert of Paran at the border of Canaan. Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan. Joshua and Caleb, two of the spies, report that the land is rich and flowing with milk and honey, but the other spies warn about giants living there, scaring the Israelites who refuse to enter. God punishes their lack of faith by decreeing they will wander in the wilderness for 40 years. God instructs Moses to make bronze plates to cover the altar. The Israelites, grumbling about the deaths of Korah's men, face a plague that kills 14,700. God declares that Aaron and his family will be responsible for any iniquities related to the sanctuary, with the Levites helping to maintain the tabernacle. The Levites must give a portion of their tithes to the priests. Miriam dies at Kadesh Barnea, and the Israelites journey toward Moab. They complain about the lack of water, and Moses, ordered by God to speak to a rock, strikes it instead. For his disobedience, God tells Moses he will not enter Canaan. The king of Edom refuses them passage, so they detour around Edom. Aaron dies on Mount Hor. The Israelites complain again and are bitten by fiery serpents. Moses makes a bronze serpent to cure those bitten. Arriving at the plains of Moab, across the Jordan from Jericho, the Israelites defeat the Amorites and Og, king of Bashan. Balak, the king of Moab, tries to curse the Israelites by summoning Balaam, a diviner. But God tells Balaam not to curse them. Balaam, stopped by an angel while traveling to Balak, ends up blessing the Israelites instead and predicts a future ruler, the Star of Jacob, who will defeat Israel's enemies. Balak is furious, but Balaam can only say what God allows. During their stay in Shittim, the Israelites intermarry with Moabites and worship Baal-peor. God sends a plague as punishment. Moses orders the judges to kill those who worship Baal-peor. When a Simonite prince, Zimri, marries a Midianite woman, Cosbi, Aaron's grandson, Phinehas kills them both. God rewards Phinehas with an everlasting priesthood and tells the Israelites to consider the Midianites enemies. A new census shows 601,730 men aged 20 and up, and 23,000 Levites from 1 month old and up. The land is to be divided by lot. The daughters of Zelophehad, who have no brothers, are granted a share of the land. God instructs Moses to appoint Joshua as his successor. The rules for feasts, offerings, and other observances are laid out. Moses orders the Israelites to attack Midian to avenge the Baal-Peor incident, killing all the men, boys, and non-virgin women, while keeping the virgin women as captives. The Reubenites and Gadites ask Moses for land east of the Jordan. Moses agrees after they promise to help conquer the land west of the Jordan. The land east of the Jordan is divided among Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Moses recalls the Israelites' journey and instructs them to exterminate the Canaanites and destroy their idols. The boundaries of the land are defined, and the division of the land is to be overseen by Eleazar, Joshua, and 12 tribal leaders. Here's a breakdown of Deuteronomy, following John Van Ceder's literary outline. Chapters 1 to 4. This section recalls the journey through the wilderness from Horeb, Sinai, to Kadesh and then to Moab. Chapters 4 to 11. After a second introduction at 4:44-49, the events at Mount Horeb are remembered, including the giving of the 10 Commandments. Heads of families are urged to teach the law to those under their care. There are warnings against serving gods other than Yahweh, praise for the land promised to Israel, and a strong push for obedience. Chapters 12 to 26, the Deuteronomic Code. These chapters cover laws about Israel's worship, the appointment and regulation of community and religious leaders, social regulations, and statements of identity and loyalty. Chapters 27 to 28. Here we find blessings and curses for those who keep or break the law. Chapters 29 to 30. This is a concluding discourse on the covenant in the land of Moab, including all the laws in the Deuteronomic Code after those given at Horeb. Israel is again urged to be obedient. Chapters 31 to 34. Joshua is installed as Moses' successor. Moses gives the law to the Levites, the priestly caste, and ascends Mount Nebo or Pisgah, where he dies and is buried by God. The narrative includes 2 poems, the Song of Moses and the Blessing of Moses. The final verses, Deuteronomy 34 verses 10 to 12, state that never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, emphasizing the authoritative Deuteronomistic view that the worship of Yahweh as the sole deity of Israel is the only acceptable religion, sealed by the greatest of prophets. Deuteronomy 12 to 26, known as the Deuteronomic Code, is the oldest part of the book and its core foundation. It's a series of mitzvot, or commands, given to the Israelites on how they should live and behave in the Promised Land.